Sarah Mitchell clutched her boarding pass with trembling fingers as she approached the gate agent at Denver International Airport. The fluorescent light seemed to mock her as she stood in the priority boarding line, wearing her best business suit that she had saved for months to buy. Today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be the day she finally felt like she belonged in the world of corporate success. The gate agent, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a practiced smile, barely glanced at Sarah before her expression shifted. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some additional identification," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for people who didn't quite fit the first-class image. Sarah's heart sank as she fumbled through her purse, producing her driver's license and credit card. She had worked 3 jobs for the past 2 years, saving every penny to afford this first-class ticket to New York. The business meeting waiting for her could change everything, a potential partnership that would finally lift her small consulting firm out of the struggle she had endured since her divorce. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your ticket," the agent continued, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with theatrical precision. Other passengers in line began to shift impatiently behind Sarah, their expensive luggage and designer clothes a stark contrast to her modest appearance. The truth was obvious to everyone watching. Sarah didn't look like she belonged in first class. Her shoes, though polished, showed signs of wear. Her briefcase was practical rather than luxurious. Most damning of all, she carried herself with the nervous energy of someone who wasn't accustomed to such privileges. "What kind of issue?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the eyes of other passengers burning into her back, their judgment palpable in the recycled airport air. The gate agent's smile became even more artificial. "It appears your ticket may have been purchased with a fraudulent card. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we verify this information." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had paid for this ticket with her own hard-earned money, sacrificing meals and comfort for months to make this moment possible. The implication that she had somehow stolen or scammed her way into first class was both humiliating and infuriating. "That's impossible," Sarah protested, her voice growing stronger despite her embarrassment. "I have the receipt right here, and you can call my bank to verify the transaction." But the agent had already moved on to the next passenger, dismissing Sarah with a wave of her hand. "Please step to the side, ma'am. Security will be with you shortly." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame as she moved away from the line. Other first-class passengers avoided eye contact, some whispering among themselves. She overheard fragments of their conversations, words like suspicious and doesn't belong that cut deeper than any knife. Standing alone by the window, watching planes taxi on the runway, Sarah wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe she wasn't ready for this world. Maybe the agent was right and she didn't belong in first class. The weight of years of struggling to rebuild her life after her marriage fell apart seemed to crush down on her shoulders. 20 minutes passed before a security officer approached her, but instead of the confrontation she expected, he simply handed her back her documents. "Everything checks out, ma'am. You're clear to board." The gate agent's expression soured when Sarah returned to the line, but she had no choice but to process the boarding pass. "You'll be in seat 2A, she said curtly, avoiding Sarah's eyes. As Sarah walked down the jet bridge, her legs felt unsteady. The encounter had shaken her confidence to its core. She had fought so hard to get here, to prove that she could succeed despite everything that had tried to knock her down. But maybe success wasn't just about having the money for a first-class ticket. Maybe it was about belonging in spaces where people assumed you didn't deserve to be. The flight attendant at the aircraft door greeted her with a professional smile, but Sarah caught the quick glance at her boarding pass and the subtle change in expression. Even here, surrounded by the luxury she had worked so hard to afford, she felt like an outsider looking in. Taking her seat in 2A, Sarah tried to calm her racing heart. The leather was soft beneath her hands, and the extra space felt foreign after years of cramped economy flights. She had imagined this moment so many times, but never like this, never with the taste of humiliation still bitter in her mouth. As other passengers filed past her, some stealing curious glances, Sarah stared out the small window and wondered if the meeting in New York would be worth all of this. She had risked everything on this opportunity, and already the journey was testing her resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. Captain James Hawk Rodriguez completed his pre-flight checks with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. At 38, He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced life-and-death situations and emerged stronger. His transition from Navy SEAL to commercial airline pilot had been seamless, though he sometimes missed the adrenaline of special operations. Walking through the first-class cabin for his customary passenger greeting, James noticed the tension immediately. Years of reading people and situations had given him an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was wrong. The passengers seemed unusually quiet, and there was an uncomfortable energy in the air that had nothing to do with pre-flight jitters. His eyes fell on the woman in seat 2A, and he recognized the posture immediately, shoulders slightly hunched, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes focused on something far beyond the airplane window. It was the stance of someone who had been made to feel small, someone who was questioning whether they belonged where they were. James had seen that look before in the mirror. During his own early days when he had tried to leave behind his rough childhood in East Los Angeles. He remembered the country club dinners where fellow officers' wives had made subtle comments about his background. The way some people assumed he was the help, rather than a decorated naval officer. "Good afternoon, folks," James announced to the cabin, his voice carrying the natural authority that commanded attention. "I'm Captain Rodriguez, and I'll be flying you to New York today. We're looking at smooth skies and an on-time arrival." As he moved through the cabin, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, James made mental notes. The businessman in 1B kept glancing at the woman in 2A with barely concealed disdain. The couple in row 3 whispered to each other while stealing looks in her direction. Whatever had happened before he arrived, it was clear that someone had been singled out and made to feel unwelcome. James paused beside seat 2A. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Captain Rodriguez. Is this your first time flying with us?" Sarah looked up, startled by the direct attention. "Oh, yes. Thank you, Captain." She managed a small smile, but James could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Well, we're honored to have you aboard. If there's anything you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to let me know personally." His tone was warm but carried an undertone that the rest of the cabin couldn't miss. This passenger was under his protection. The businessman in 1B shifted uncomfortably. He had been among the loudest voices questioning Sarah's presence during the boarding delay, making comments about airport security these days that everyone understood were really about her appearance and economic status. James completed his rounds and returned to the cockpit, but something gnawed at him. During his SEAL days, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now they were telling him that the woman in 2A had been treated poorly by his other passengers. As a captain, he had the authority to ensure every passenger felt safe and welcome aboard his aircraft. 20 minutes into the flight, after they had reached cruising altitude, James made a decision that would surprise everyone on board. He contacted the head flight attendant through the intercom. "Jennifer, could you please ask the passenger in 2A if she would like to visit the cockpit? I'd like to show her how we navigate to New York." Jennifer's voice came back with barely concealed surprise. "Captain, are you sure?" "We don't usually—" "I'm sure," James interrupted. "Please extend the invitation." In the first-class cabin, passengers looked up in shock when Jennifer approached Sarah's seat. Cockpit visits were extremely rare, usually reserved for children or special circumstances. For an adult passenger to be personally invited by the captain was almost unheard of. "Ma'am, Captain Rodriguez would like to know if you'd be interested in visiting the cockpit. He said he'd like to show you how we navigate to New York." Sarah's eyes widened. "Are you sure? Is that allowed?" "The captain makes those decisions, ma'am. He specifically requested your company." The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. The businessman who had been so dismissive earlier suddenly found his newspaper fascinating. The whispering couple fell silent. Every passenger in first class was now looking at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Sarah followed Jennifer toward the cockpit, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and bewilderment. She could feel every eye in first class following her movement. But now the attention felt different. Instead of judgment, there was something that looked almost like envy. As they reached the cockpit door, Jennifer paused. "The captain doesn't do this often," she said quietly. "You must have made quite an impression." Sarah couldn't imagine how that was possible, given that their interaction had lasted less than 30 seconds. But as the cockpit door opened and Captain Rodriguez turned to greet her with a genuine smile, she began to understand that something significant was happening. "Welcome to my office," James said, gesturing to the sophisticated array of instruments and displays. I thought you might enjoy seeing how we find our way across the country. The cockpit was like stepping into the future, all glowing screens and precise instrumentation. But what struck Sarah most was the captain's genuine enthusiasm as he began explaining the various systems. He wasn't talking down to her or showing off. He was sharing something he clearly loved with someone he thought might appreciate it. As Sarah stood in the cockpit doorway, Captain Rodriguez could see the wonder in her eyes. It reminded him of his own first time in a military aircraft cockpit, when everything had seemed impossibly complex yet beautiful in its precision. But he also noticed something else, the way she held herself, as if she was still expecting someone to tell her she didn't belong there. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, looking at the vast array of instruments and screens. "How do you keep track of everything?" James smiled, remembering his co-pilot was due back from his break soon. "It's like learning a new language. Once you understand what each instrument is telling you, it all starts to make sense. See this screen here?" He pointed to the navigation display. "This shows us exactly where we are and where we're going. We're currently flying over Kansas, about 37,000 feet up." Sarah leaned closer to look at the display, and James could see her genuine curiosity. "I work with data systems in my consulting business, but nothing like this. The precision required must be extraordinary." "You're in consulting?" James asked, genuinely interested. "What kind of work do you do?" For the first time since boarding, Sarah's posture straightened with confidence. "I help small businesses optimize their operations and data management. I've been building my company for the past 3 years, and I'm actually flying to New York for a potential partnership meeting that could change everything." James heard the passion in her voice when she talked about her work, and it confirmed his instinct about her. This wasn't someone who didn't belong in first class. This was someone who had worked hard to get there and deserved to be treated with respect. "That sounds fascinating," he said. "The military taught me that good data management can be the difference between success and failure in any operation. I bet your clients don't realize how crucial your work is to their success." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. For the first time all day, someone was talking to her about her professional capabilities rather than questioning her right to be somewhere. Most of them don't actually. They think of it as paperwork, but when you show them how the right systems can save them thousands of dollars and hours of work, they start to understand. James nodded appreciatively. "Sounds like you're solving real problems for people. That's honorable work." He paused, then made another decision that would surprise her. "Would you like to sit in the co-pilot seat for a few minutes? My first officer's on his break, and I think you'd enjoy seeing the view from up here." Sarah's eyes widened. "Is that allowed? I don't want to get you in trouble." "I'm the captain," James said with a slight grin. "What I say goes on this aircraft. And right now I'm saying you should experience what it's like to sit where only a few people ever get to sit." As Sarah settled into the co-pilot seat, James adjusted the seat and showed her how to use the headset. The view from the cockpit was breathtaking, endless blue sky above and a patchwork of farmland below. But more than the view, it was the feeling of being included, of being treated as someone worthy of this special experience. "Captain," Sarah said quietly, "can I ask you something? Why are you doing this? I mean, showing me all this?" James was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the controls as he considered his answer. "Because I've been where you are," he said finally. "I grew up in a neighborhood where people told me I'd never amount to anything. When I made it into the Navy and later became a SEAL, there were plenty of people who thought I didn't belong. I learned that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to change everything." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Someone really hurt my feelings during boarding today. Made me feel like I didn't deserve to be in first class." "Well, they were wrong," James said firmly. "You paid for that seat just like everyone else, and you're building a business that helps people. That takes courage and intelligence. Don't let anyone make you feel small for achieving something you worked hard for." Through the cockpit door they could hear the murmur of voices from the first-class cabin. Word had spread throughout the aircraft that a passenger was sitting in the co-pilot seat, something that almost never happened. Flight attendants kept finding excuses to walk past the cockpit, stealing glances at the unusual sight. "You know," James continued, "in the military we had a saying, 'Respect is earned, not given.' But I think that's only half true. Basic human dignity should be given freely. Respect for achievements, that's what you earn. And from what you've told me about your business, you've earned plenty of respect." Sarah looked out at the endless sky ahead of them. From up here, the problems at the gate seemed small and far away. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just confidence in her abilities, but a sense that she deserved to take up space in the world. "I keep thinking about that meeting tomorrow," she admitted. "What if they don't take me seriously either? What if I've risked everything for nothing?" James turned to look at her directly. "Then you'll handle it the same way you handled today, with grace and determination. And if they don't see your value, then they don't deserve your business. But I have a feeling you're going to surprise them." The radio crackled with air traffic control communications, and James responded with the calm professionalism that had made him successful in both his military and civilian careers. Sarah watched him work, noting how he commanded respect simply by being competent and confident in his role. "The view from up here is amazing," Sarah said, looking down at the clouds below them. "It changes your perspective, doesn't it?" James replied. "When you're up this high, you realize how small some problems really are. The important thing is to remember this feeling when you're back on the ground." First Officer Michael Chen returned from his break to find his seat occupied by a passenger, something that had never happened in his 12 years of commercial flying. Captain Rodriguez was calmly explaining the flight management system to a woman who was listening with genuine fascination. "Mike, I'd like you to meet Sarah Mitchell," James said as his co-pilot approached. "Sarah, this is First Officer Chen. Sarah runs a data consulting business and was asking some great questions about our navigation systems." Mike's initial surprise quickly gave way to curiosity. Captain Rodriguez was known for being strictly professional, and this deviation from protocol was completely out of character. But Mike had learned to trust his captain's judgment implicitly. "Pleased to meet you, Sarah," Mike said warmly. "I hope the captain hasn't been boring you with too much technical talk." "Not at all," Sarah replied, starting to stand. "I should probably get back to my seat so you can do your job." "Nonsense," James said. "Mike, why don't you show Sarah how the autopilot system works? I think she'd find it interesting from a data management perspective." As Mike began explaining the computer systems that helped fly the plane, Sarah found herself genuinely engaged. The conversation reminded her why she loved working with complex systems. There was something beautiful about the way different components worked together to achieve a common goal. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, passengers were becoming increasingly curious about the extended cockpit visit. Jennifer, the head flight attendant, had fielded several questions about why one passenger was receiving such special treatment. "Is she someone important?" asked the businessman in 1B, his earlier dismissiveness now replaced with curiosity tinged with embarrassment. "All of our passengers are important, sir," Jennifer replied diplomatically, though privately she was enjoying the man's obvious discomfort. She had witnessed his behavior during boarding and had no sympathy for his confusion. The couple in row 3 had been whispering to each other for 20 minutes, trying to figure out who Sarah might be. "Maybe she's an airline executive traveling incognito," the woman suggested to her husband. "Or maybe she's a government official," he replied. "You know how these Homeland Security people travel." Back in the cockpit, Sarah was discovering that her background in data systems gave her a unique perspective on aviation technology. "So the flight management computer is essentially running multiple backup systems simultaneously?" she asked. "Exactly," Mike replied, impressed by her quick grasp of the concepts. "Redundancy is everything in aviation. We never rely on just one system for critical functions. That's smart business practice in any industry," Sarah observed. "I always tell my clients to have backup plans for their backup plans. Data loss can destroy a small business overnight." James listened to the conversation with growing respect for Sarah's intelligence and insight. His instinct about her had been correct. She was someone who deserved respect and recognition, not judgment and exclusion. "Sarah," James said, "would you mind if I asked what kind of partnership you're pursuing in New York? I'm always interested in hearing about successful entrepreneurs." Sarah hesitated for a moment, still not entirely comfortable talking about her ambitions with such confidence. "There's a technology firm that wants to integrate my data optimization protocols into their software platform. If it works out, it could mean expanding my business nationally instead of just regionally." "That sounds like a significant opportunity," Mike said. "You must have developed something pretty special to catch their attention." "I hope so," Sarah replied. "I've put everything I have into this business. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy for taking such big risks. James thought about his own transition from military to civilian life, the risks he had taken, and the moments when he had questioned his decisions. The biggest risk is often not taking any risk at all. If you've built something valuable, then you owe it to yourself to see how far it can go. As they flew over Ohio, approaching the halfway point of their journey, Sarah realized that this unexpected time in the cockpit was changing something fundamental about how she saw herself. For years, she had felt like she was fighting to prove she belonged in professional spaces. But here, 37,000 feet above the ground, she wasn't fighting for acceptance, she was simply being accepted. You know, she said thoughtfully, I've been so focused on proving myself to other people that I forgot to believe in myself. Sitting here, talking with both of you about systems and business and taking risks, this is the first time in months that I felt like the person I used to be before everything fell apart. James and Mike exchanged a glance. They could hear the vulnerability in her voice, and both men recognized the courage it took to admit such feelings to strangers. Sometimes we all need a reminder of who we really are, James said gently. The people who tried to make you feel small today, they don't know you. They don't know what you've built or what you've overcome. Their opinions about you say more about them than they do about you. Sarah looked out at the landscape below, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Not just the flight, but the years of struggle, the late nights building her business, the sacrifices she had made to create something meaningful. I used to be so confident, she admitted. When I was married, when everything seemed stable, I never questioned whether I belonged anywhere. But after the divorce, after having to start over completely, I guess I started believing that maybe I really wasn't good enough for certain things. Mike, who had gone through his own difficult divorce several years earlier, nodded with understanding. Starting over takes incredible strength. Most people don't have the courage to rebuild their lives from scratch. And the fact that you're succeeding proves you were strong all along, James added. You just needed to remember it. As they began their descent toward New York, James made an announcement that would create ripples throughout the aviation industry. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're beginning our descent into LaGuardia Airport, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone special we have aboard today. In the first-class cabin, passengers looked up from their magazines and laptops, curious about this unusual personal announcement. We have the privilege of flying with Sarah Mitchell, an entrepreneur and data systems consultant who is traveling to New York for an important business meeting. Sarah represents the kind of American innovation and determination that makes our country strong. It's been my honor to share some flight time with her today. The cabin fell completely silent. Passengers who had earlier dismissed or ignored Sarah now realized they had completely misjudged the situation. The businessman in 1B felt his face flush with embarrassment as he remembered his comments during boarding. The whispering couple looked at each other with mortification. In the cockpit, Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Captain, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, James replied firmly. Leadership isn't just about flying airplanes. Sometimes it's about making sure good people get the recognition they deserve. As Sarah prepared to return to her seat for landing, James handed her his business card. I have some contacts in the New York business community, he said. If your meeting doesn't go as planned, or if you need additional connections, please don't hesitate to reach out. Sarah looked at the card in amazement. Captain James Rodriguez, with contact information and a small note written on the back. Courage is contagious. Keep spreading it. When Sarah walked back through the first-class cabin to her seat, the atmosphere was completely different from when she had left. Passengers who had avoided eye contact earlier now smiled and nodded respectfully. The businessman in 1B actually stood up as she passed. Excuse me, he said quietly, his voice heavy with shame. I owe you an apology. My behavior earlier was inexcusable. Sarah paused, looking at the man who had been so dismissive just hours earlier. She could see genuine remorse in his eyes, and she realized this was a moment that could define not just how she felt about the flight, but how she approached forgiveness and grace in her business dealings. Thank you, she said simply. That means a lot. The couple in row 3 also made eye contact as she passed, offering embarrassed but sincere smiles of acknowledgement. The woman mouthed sorry, and Sarah nodded graciously. As the plane touched down at LaGuardia, Sarah felt like a completely different person than the one who had boarded in Denver. The nervous, self-doubting woman who had been humiliated at the gate had been replaced by someone who remembered her own worth and capabilities. Jennifer, the flight attendant, approached Sarah as passengers began gathering their belongings. "Ma'am, I've been flying for 15 years and I've never seen Captain Rodriguez do anything like what he did for you today. He saw something special in you." "He saw something I had forgotten about myself," Sarah replied, gathering her briefcase with newfound confidence. As passengers deplaned, several stopped to speak with Sarah. A woman from coach who had heard the captain's announcement approached her in the jet bridge. "I couldn't help but overhear about your business," she said. "I run a small marketing firm and we're always looking for good data consultants. Could I give you my card?" The businessman from 1B waited until most passengers had left before approaching Sarah again. "I manage investments for a venture capital firm," he said, clearly still embarrassed by his earlier behavior. "If you're looking for funding to expand your business, I'd like to make amends by offering you a consultation." Sarah accepted both cards graciously, realizing that the captain's recognition had opened doors she never could have imagined. But more than the business opportunities, she felt a fundamental shift in how she carried herself. Walking through the terminal toward baggage claim, Sarah called her assistant back home. "Jessica, it's me. I'm in New York and I need you to clear my schedule for the rest of the week. I have a feeling this trip is going to be bigger than we planned." "How did the flight go?" Jessica asked. "You sound different." "More confident," Sarah smiled, thinking about the extraordinary afternoon in the cockpit and the captain who had reminded her of who she really was. "Let's just say I remembered something important about myself. Something I'd forgotten for way too long." That evening in her hotel room, Sarah prepared for her meeting the next day with a level of confidence she hadn't felt in years. She laid out her presentation materials and reviewed her talking points. But now she was approaching the meeting as an equal partner rather than someone begging for acceptance. She thought about Captain Rodriguez's words about respect being earned through competence and dignity being given freely. Tomorrow she would walk into that boardroom not as someone hoping to prove she belonged, but as someone who knew she belonged. Before going to sleep, Sarah wrote a thank you email to Captain Rodriguez, expressing her gratitude for his kindness and leadership. She attached a summary of her business model and mentioned that she would love to return the favor someday by helping optimize data systems for his airline. The response came back within an hour. "Sarah, it was my privilege to meet you. True leaders lift others up, and I can already see you're going to lift up everyone around you. Safe travels and successful meetings. Hawk." The next morning, Sarah walked into the Manhattan offices of Tech Forward Solutions with a presence that commanded immediate attention. The receptionist, who had been prepared to direct her to a small conference room for what the company assumed would be a routine vendor presentation, instead found herself calling upstairs to announce the arrival of someone who clearly belonged in the executive suite. "Ms. Mitchell is here for the partnership meeting," the receptionist said into her headset, then paused, listening. "Yes, sir. I'll send her right up to the boardroom." As Sarah rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, she thought about the transformation that had occurred in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she had been someone who questioned her right to be in first class. Today, she was someone who knew she deserved a seat at any table. The elevator doors opened to reveal David Chen, the CEO of Tech Forward, waiting personally to greet her. This was unusual. Typically, such meetings began with lower-level executives and worked up to the decision-makers. But something about Sarah's confident phone call the evening before had intrigued him enough to clear his morning schedule. "Sarah, welcome to Tech Forward," David said, extending his hand. "I have to admit your email last night got my attention. Not many consultants follow up a proposal with insights about how our internal data management could be improved." Sarah smiled, remembering how Captain Rodriguez had encouraged her to approach this as an equal partnership rather than a supplicant seeking approval. "I believe in demonstrating value up front, David. Anyone can make promises, but showing concrete solutions builds trust." As they walked toward the boardroom, David was struck by Sarah's confidence and directness. His initial plan had been a polite evaluation meeting that would likely end with a standard "we'll be in touch" response. But this woman was clearly not someone who could be dismissed with corporate pleasantries. The boardroom contained 5 executives, including the Chief Technology Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. Sarah had expected to feel intimidated by such a high-level group, but instead she felt energized. These were her peers and she had solutions they needed. "Sarah has an interesting proposition for us," David began, but Sarah gently interrupted. "Before we discuss what I can do for Tech Forward, I'd like to understand what keeps you up at night," she said, looking around the table with genuine curiosity. "What are the challenges that your current systems aren't solving?" The CTO, Marcus Williams, leaned forward with interest. Most vendors came in trying to sell predetermined solutions. This consultant was starting with questions, a sign of someone who actually understood business problems. "Our biggest issue is data integration," Marcus admitted. "We've grown through acquisitions, and now we have 5 different systems that don't talk to each other effectively. It's costing us millions in inefficiency." Sarah nodded, pulling out her tablet and taking notes. "How long does it typically take your teams to generate consolidated reports across all systems?" "Currently, about 2 weeks for anything comprehensive," the CFO replied with obvious frustration. "By the time we have the data, it's often too outdated to be actionable." "And what's the cost of delayed decision-making in your market?" Sarah asked. The room fell silent as the executives exchanged glances. This was exactly the right question, one that went to the heart of their competitive challenges. "In our industry, a 2-week delay in responding to market trends can mean losing millions in revenue," David said slowly. "We've lost 3 major opportunities this year because we couldn't move fast enough on the data." Sarah spent the next hour asking detailed questions about their systems, their goals, and their constraints. She took notes, sketched diagrams, and demonstrated a level of understanding that impressed everyone in the room. But more than her technical knowledge, it was her approach that set her apart. She was clearly thinking about their problems as if they were her own. "Based on what you've told me," Sarah said finally, "I can design a solution that will reduce your reporting time from 2 weeks to 2 days, and the cost would pay for itself within 6 months through improved decision-making speed alone." Marcus sat up straighter. "That seems ambitious. What makes you confident you can deliver those results?" Sarah smiled, thinking about her conversation with Captain Rodriguez about backing up your backup systems. "Because I've done it before and because I never promise results I can't deliver. I'd like to propose a pilot program where we implement the solution for 1 business unit first. If I don't deliver the promised improvements within 90 days, you pay nothing." The boldness of the offer surprised everyone in the room. Most consultants asked for payment up front and delivered results that were often less impressive than promised. This woman was willing to stake her reputation and cash flow on her ability to solve their problems. "That's a confident proposal," the VP of Strategic Partnerships said. "What do you need from us to make it work?" "Access to your systems, honest feedback from your teams, and the authority to make necessary changes," Sarah replied. "I don't believe in solutions that look good on paper but fail in practice. I want to work alongside your people to create something that actually improves their daily work." David looked around the table and saw the same thing in everyone's eyes that he was feeling. This was not the meeting they had expected, and Sarah was not the typical consultant they usually encountered. She was someone who understood their business and had the confidence to guarantee results. "Sarah," David said, "I think we should move beyond our original scope. Instead of just integrating your protocols into our software, I'd like to discuss a broader partnership. What would it look like for you to lead our entire data optimization initiative?" Sarah felt her heart race, but outwardly she remained calm and professional. This was beyond her biggest dreams for the meeting, but she had learned from Captain Rodriguez to approach opportunities with confidence rather than desperation. "That would depend on several factors," she said thoughtfully. "The scope of work, the timeline, the resources available, and how much autonomy I would have to implement real solutions. I'm not interested in being a consultant who writes reports that sit on shelves. I want to create measurable change." The CFO leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. "What kind of timeline are we talking about for full implementation?" 12 to 18 months for complete integration across all business units," Sarah replied without hesitation. "But you'll see measurable improvements within the first quarter and significant cost savings by month 6. Marcus pulled up some financial projections on his laptop. "If you could really deliver a 2-week to 2-day improvement in our reporting cycle, we're looking at a potential competitive advantage worth tens of millions annually." "That's exactly right," Sarah said. "But it's not just about speed. It's about accuracy, accessibility, and the ability to spot trends before your competitors do. In today's market, information advantage is everything. David stood up and walked to the window overlooking Manhattan. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. We've been looking for someone to lead this initiative for 8 months. We've interviewed consultants from major firms and they all gave us impressive presentations about what they could do. You're the first person who's asked us what we actually need. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward Captain Rodriguez. His encouragement to approach this as an equal partnership rather than a job interview had fundamentally changed how she presented herself and her capabilities. I believe the best partnerships are built on mutual benefit and honest communication, she said. I'm not here to impress you with fancy presentations. I'm here to solve real problems that are costing you real money. The VP of Strategic Partnerships looked at her colleagues around the table. I think we need to discuss terms. Sarah, would you be willing to consider relocating to New York for the duration of this project? Sarah had not expected this question, but she found herself responding with confidence rather than panic. I'd be open to discussing a hybrid arrangement. My company is based in Denver, but I understand the value of being on site for critical phases of implementation. What if we made this more than a consulting contract? David asked, turning back from the window. What if we offered you a position as our chief data officer, with equity participation and the authority to build your own team? The room fell silent. This was far beyond anything Sarah had imagined when she boarded the plane in Denver. She was being offered a C-level executive position at a major technology company, something that would transform not just her business but her entire life. But instead of jumping at the offer immediately, Sarah found herself thinking strategically. That's an intriguing proposition, David, but I'd need to understand the reporting structure, the budget authority, and the long-term vision for the role. I'm also committed to my existing clients, and I'd need to ensure a smooth transition. Marcus smiled broadly. She's negotiating terms before accepting. I like that. Shows she thinks strategically about commitments. I'd also want to bring some of my key team members with me, Sarah continued. I have people who understand my methods and have been instrumental in developing these solutions. Good data management isn't just about systems, it's about people who know how to make those systems work. David nodded appreciatively. Absolutely. We'd want you to bring your best people. When can you give us an answer? Sarah looked around the table at faces that were now showing genuine respect and interest rather than polite skepticism. Give me a week to review my commitments and discuss this with my team. I want to make sure I can deliver on any promises I make. As the meeting concluded, each executive made a point of shaking Sarah's hand and expressing their excitement about the potential partnership. The transformation from a routine vendor meeting to a strategic recruitment discussion had happened because Sarah had approached the situation with confidence and competence rather than desperation. Walking out of the Tech Forward building into the busy Manhattan afternoon, Sarah called Captain Rodriguez from the sidewalk. Hawk, it's Sarah Mitchell. I wanted to thank you again and let you know that your advice worked better than I could have imagined. I had a feeling it would, James replied warmly. You sound like someone who just discovered her own power. I think I did, Sarah said, looking up at the skyscrapers around her. They offered me a position I never dreamed of, and I had the confidence to negotiate terms instead of just being grateful they noticed me. That's the difference between asking for a seat at the table and knowing you deserve one, James said. I'm proud of you, Sarah. You remembered who you are. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her corner office on the 34th floor of the Tech Forward building, looking out at the Manhattan skyline as she prepared for the quarterly board presentation. Her transformation from a struggling consultant to chief data officer had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. The data integration project she had promised to complete in 12 to 18 months was ahead of schedule and under budget. More importantly, the 2-day reporting cycle she had promised was now a reality, and Tech Forward had gained a significant competitive advantage in their market. Her assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Mitchell, the board members are gathering in the conference room. Also, there's a Captain Rodriguez here to see you. He says you're expecting him. Sarah smiled broadly. She had invited James to attend today's presentation as her personal guest, wanting to share this moment with the person who had helped her remember her worth. Please, send Captain Rodriguez in and let the board know I'll be there in 5 minutes. James walked into the office wearing his pilot uniform, having just completed a flight from Denver to LaGuardia. "Impressive," he said, looking around the spacious office with its view of Central Park. "This is quite a change from our cockpit conversation 6 months ago." "The view is better, but the company was more interesting back then," Sarah said with a warm smile. "Thank you for coming, Hawk. I wanted you to see what your kindness made possible." James shook his head. "I didn't make this possible, Sarah, you did. I just reminded you of something you had forgotten." Sarah picked up a framed photo from her desk, a picture of her team celebrating the successful completion of the data integration project. "I brought 3 of my people from Denver and we've hired 12 more. We're not just fixing tech-forward systems. We're creating solutions that other companies are now asking to license." "That's the entrepreneur in you," James observed. "You saw an opportunity and built something bigger than anyone expected." As they walked toward the boardroom, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The scared, self-doubting woman who had been humiliated at the airport gate seemed like a different person entirely. The confidence she had rediscovered in the cockpit had grown into genuine leadership skills that were transforming not just her own life, but the lives of everyone on her team. The boardroom was filled with tech forwards, senior leadership, and several board members from other companies who had heard about the remarkable improvements in data efficiency. Sarah's presentation would outline not just what they had accomplished, but the expansion plans that could revolutionize how mid-sized companies managed their information systems. "Ladies and gentlemen," David Chen announced as Sarah and James entered the room, "I'd like you to meet our Chief Data Officer, Sarah Mitchell, and her guest, Captain James Rodriguez." Sarah had insisted that James be introduced properly, wanting everyone to know about the man whose leadership had changed her life. As she began her presentation, she could see James sitting in the back of the room, his presence a reminder of the courage and confidence she had rediscovered. 6 months ago, TechForward was struggling with data integration issues that were costing us millions in delayed decision-making, Sarah began. "Today, I'm happy to report that we've not only solved those problems, but we've created a competitive advantage that's driving significant new revenue." The presentation showcased remarkable results. Reporting times reduced from 2 weeks to 36 hours. Decision-making speed increased by 400%, and cost savings that had already exceeded the initial investment by 300%. But more than the numbers, Sarah spoke about the cultural transformation that had occurred when employees could access the information they needed to do their jobs effectively. "The most important lesson we've learned," Sarah continued, "is that data management isn't just about technology. It's about empowering people to make better decisions faster. When you give people the tools they need to succeed, they consistently exceed expectations." One of the board members raised his hand. "Sarah, these results are impressive, but what's your vision for scaling this approach beyond TechForward?" Sarah had been hoping for this question. "We're proposing the creation of Data Forward, a subsidiary company that would provide these solutions to other organizations. We already have 12 companies requesting consultations, and the market potential is enormous." The room buzzed with excitement. What had started as an internal efficiency project was now becoming a potential new business line worth millions in additional revenue. After the presentation, as board members discussed the expansion proposal, James approached Sarah in the hallway. "You've built something remarkable here," he said. "But more importantly, you've remembered how to believe in yourself." "I've been thinking about that flight a lot," Sarah replied. "How different my life might have been if you hadn't invited me into the cockpit. If you hadn't made that announcement about recognizing good people." James smiled. "You would have figured it out eventually. Strong people always do. I just helped speed up the process." Sarah pulled out an envelope from her briefcase. "I have something for you. TechForward is launching a new initiative to improve aviation data systems, and I recommended you as our primary consultant." The board approved it unanimously. James opened the envelope to find a formal consulting agreement that would allow him to work on aviation technology projects during his time off from flying. It was exactly the kind of challenge he had been looking for as he considered his post-flying career. "You didn't have to do this," James said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "Yes, I did," Sarah replied, echoing his words from 6 months earlier. "Leadership isn't just about running companies. Sometimes it's about making sure good people get the opportunities they deserve." That evening, Sarah and James had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. As they talked about their respective journeys, his from East Los Angeles to Navy SEAL to airline captain, hers from divorce and financial struggle to corporate leadership, they realized they had both learned the same fundamental lesson. The most important thing anyone can do, Sarah said, is help other people remember their own worth. That's what you did for me, and it changed everything. And that's what you're doing now for your team and your clients, James replied. You're creating environments where people can succeed beyond their own expectations. As Sarah looked out at the lights reflecting on the water, she thought about the gate agent who had tried to make her feel small, the passengers who had dismissed her, and all the other times in her life when people had underestimated her capabilities. None of that mattered now. What mattered was that she had remembered who she was and used that knowledge to build something meaningful. 6 months later, Data Forward had become one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the country. Sarah's team had expanded to 43 people across 6 cities, and they were transforming data management for companies across multiple industries. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had established a company culture based on the lessons she had learned in the cockpit. That true success comes from lifting others up and helping them remember their own worth. Every new employee received the same message she had learned from Captain Rodriguez: that respect is earned through competence, and dignity should be given freely to everyone. The scared woman who had been rejected from first class was gone, replaced by a leader who made sure no one in her organization ever felt like they didn't belong. And somewhere in the skies above, Captain James Rodriguez continued to fly passengers safely to their destinations, occasionally making announcements recognizing the good people aboard his flights, never knowing how far those small acts of kindness might travel.